When a desperate foundling accepts work from a grief-stricken rancher in 1867 Montana, she discovers that his quiet strength and unexpected embrace awaken something she never knew existed within her wounded heart. But as their partnership deepens into something the town refuses to understand, will society's judgment destroy the one place where she finally learned what it meant to be truly valued? The cold Montana wind cut through Iris Hartwell's thin dress like a knife as she pressed herself against the wooden wall of Murphy's General Store. Outside, the year 1867 had brought another harsh autumn to the territory, and inside the store, voices whispered about her like she wasn't even there. "That girl brings nothing but trouble wherever she goes." Mrs. Henderson's sharp voice sliced through the dusty air. Her words hit Iris harder than any slap ever could. Iris squeezed her eyes shut and tried to make herself smaller. At 16, she had learned to disappear into corners and shadows. Nobody wanted a girl with no family and no money. Nobody wanted someone who had been left on the church steps as a baby with nothing but a torn blanket and a note that said, "Please take care of Iris." The other women in the store nodded their heads like they agreed with every mean word. "She got fired from the Miller farm last week," another woman added. "They said she stole their best silver spoon." Iris's hands shook with anger. She hadn't stolen anything. The spoon had fallen behind Mrs. Miller's sewing basket, and they found it 3 days after they threw her out. But nobody had come to say sorry. Nobody ever said sorry to girls like her. "She'll end up on the streets if someone doesn't take pity on her soon," Mrs. Henderson continued, "though I can't imagine who would be foolish enough to trust her." The bell above the store door rang out like a church bell, and heavy boots walked across the wooden floor. Iris looked up to see a tall man in a brown leather coat. His face looked tired, like he carried heavy thoughts wherever he went. She knew who he was: Jacob Whitmore, the rancher who lived alone in the valley past the town. Everyone said his wife had died 2 winters ago. Since then, he barely talked to anyone. He came to town for supplies and left without saying much more than "good day" to the store owner. Jacob moved quietly through the store, picking up flour, coffee, and other things he needed. His hands were gentle as he touched each item, like he was being careful not to break anything. When he reached for a bag of sugar on the high shelf, their eyes met across the store. Something strange happened in that moment. Instead of looking away like most people did, Jacob kept looking at her. His brown eyes weren't filled with pity or disgust. They looked understanding, like he knew what it felt like to be alone in a world that didn't seem to want you. Mrs. Henderson noticed Jacob looking at Iris and made a disgusted sound. "Don't let that girl fool you, Mr. Whitmore. She's nothing but trouble waiting to happen." Jacob's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. He just kept gathering his supplies while the women continued their gossip. Iris watched him work, noticing how his movements were steady and sure. Everything about him seemed solid, like a mountain that couldn't be moved by wind or rain. When Jacob finished shopping, he walked to the counter to pay. The store owner, Mr. Murphy, counted his money and put it in the cash box. "That'll do it, Jacob. See you next month." But instead of leaving, Jacob turned around and looked directly at Iris. The whole store went quiet, like everyone was holding their breath to see what would happen next. "Miss," Jacob said, his voice deep and calm, "might I have a word with you outside?" Iris felt her heart start beating so fast she thought everyone could hear it. Why would Jacob Whitmore want to talk to her? She looked around the store and saw all the women staring at her with wide eyes and open mouths. "Me?" she whispered, pointing to herself. "Yes, you," Jacob said with something that might have been a small smile. "If you don't mind." Iris stood up on shaky legs and followed Jacob toward the door. Behind her, she could hear the women starting to whisper again, their voices buzzing like angry bees. But she didn't care. For the first time in her life, someone had asked to speak with her like she mattered. Outside the store, the autumn air was crisp and clean. Jacob stood near his wagon, which was loaded with supplies. His horse, a big brown mare, stood patiently waiting. The animal looked as calm and steady as her owner. "I hear you're looking for work," Jacob said without any fancy words or dancing around the point. Iris nodded, not trusting her voice to work properly. She had been looking for work everywhere, but nobody wanted to hire her. The story about the stolen spoon had spread through town faster than wildfire. "I need help on my ranch," Jacob continued. "The work is honest and hard. I can offer you a room, food, and fair pay. No questions asked about your past." Iris stared at him like he had just spoken in a foreign language. Men like Jacob Whitmore didn't offer jobs to girls like her. They especially didn't offer jobs without asking 100 questions first. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice barely louder than the wind. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains that surrounded their little town. When he spoke again, his voice was soft but strong. "Everyone deserves a chance to show what they're made of," he said. "Seems to me you haven't had yours yet." The wagon ride to Jacob's ranch took them through country that Iris had never seen before. They left the dusty streets of Copper Creek behind and headed into a valley where golden grass bent and swayed in the wind like ocean waves. Mountains stood tall all around them, their peaks touched with the first snow of the season. Jacob didn't talk much during the ride, but his silence wasn't mean or uncomfortable. Felt peaceful, like sitting by a quiet stream. Sometimes he would point out things along the way, a hawk circling overhead, tracks in the dirt that showed where deer had crossed the road, or clouds that meant rain might come later. "How long have you lived here?" Iris finally asked, curious about this quiet man who had changed her life with just a few words. "Built the ranch with my wife 8 years ago," Jacob said, his voice getting softer when he mentioned her. "Catherine loved this valley, said it felt like God's own country." Iris could hear the sadness in his voice, but also something else, love that hadn't died even though his wife had. She wondered what it would be like to be loved that much, to have someone care about you so deeply that they still talked about you with tenderness years after you were gone. As they drove deeper into the valley, Iris saw cattle scattered across the grassland. They were big, sturdy animals with thick coats that would keep them warm when winter came. Some lifted their heads to watch the wagon pass, then went back to eating the rich grass. "How many do you have?" Iris asked. "About 200 head," Jacob replied. "They're good cattle, bred for this climate. Can handle the cold winters and find food even when the grass is covered with snow." The ranch house came into view as they rounded a bend in the dirt road. It was bigger than Iris had expected, built from logs and stone with a wide porch that faced the mountains. Smoke curled up from the chimney, and flower boxes under the windows held the dried remains of summer blooms. Behind the main house, Iris could see a barn, several smaller buildings, and what looked like a little cabin sitting by itself near a grove of pine trees. "That's where you'll stay," Jacob said, pointing to the small cabin. "It's got everything you need: bed, table, chair, and a small stove for heat. The pump for water is just outside your door." Iris couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her own place? She had never had her own place before. In all the homes where she had worked, she had slept in kitchens, storage rooms, or shared beds with other servants. The idea of having a space that was just hers seemed too good to be true. Jacob helped her down from the wagon and led her to the cabin. When he opened the door, Iris gasped. It was small but perfect, with whitewashed walls and a window that looked out toward the mountains. The bed had a colorful quilt spread across it, and on the windowsill sat a mason jar with a single purple wildflower. "My wife used to keep flowers in every room," Jacob said quietly. "Thought you might like them too." Iris felt tears starting in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wasn't used to kindness, and she didn't know how to respond to it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jacob nodded and stepped back outside. "Take some time to settle in. I'll show you around the ranch tomorrow and explain what needs doing. Supper's at 6 if you want to join me, but no pressure. Sometimes folks need time to themselves." After he left, Iris sat on the edge of the bed and looked around her new home. The cabin was simple but clean, with everything a person could need. For the first time in her life, she had a space that was hers alone. She could close the door and know that nobody would bother her or tell her she didn't belong. She walked to the window and looked out at the valley spreading before her. The mountains seemed to go on forever, and the sky was bigger than anything she had ever seen. In town, buildings and people crowded together, making everything feel small and cramped. But here there was room to breathe, room to think, room to be. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Iris heard a gentle knock on her door. When she opened it, Jacob stood there with a plate of food and a cup of milk. "Thought you might be hungry," he said. "Beef stew and fresh bread. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill you up." Iris took the plate with hands that shook slightly. "Thank you. You didn't have to bring it to me. First day in a new place can be overwhelming," Jacob said. "Figured you might want to eat in peace." As he turned to leave, Iris found herself calling after him. "Mr. Whitmore? Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." Jacob stopped and looked back at her. In the fading light, his face looked thoughtful and a little sad. "Maybe because I know what it's like to feel lost," he said. "And maybe because everyone deserves someone to believe in them." After he left, Iris ate her supper by the window, watching the stars come out one by one over the valley. The stew was the best thing she had tasted in months, and the bread was still warm from the oven. But more than the food, she was filled with something she had never experienced before: hope. For the first time in her 16 years, someone had chosen her not because they had to, not because it was their Christian duty, but because they believed she might have something valuable to offer. The feeling was scary and wonderful at the same time. As she got ready for bed, Iris wondered what tomorrow would bring. She knew the work would be hard, ranch work always was. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of failing. Jacob had given her something precious. A chance to prove herself, and more importantly, a chance to discover who she really was when someone believed in her. Outside her window, the mountains stood silent and strong against the starry sky, and Iris felt like maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could belong. The rooster's crow split the darkness like a gunshot, and Iris bolted upright in her bed, heart pounding. Through her cabin window, she could barely see the first hint of dawn creeping over the mountains. She had never woken up this early in her life, but ranch work started before the sun showed its face. She dressed quickly in the dark, pulling on the sturdy work clothes Jacob had left for her the night before. The pants felt strange after years of wearing dresses, but they would be much better for the kind of work she'd be doing. When she stepped outside, the morning air was so cold it made her breath come out in white puffs. Jacob was already in the barn, moving between the stalls with a lantern in one hand and a bucket of feed in the other. The soft sounds of animals stirring and eating filled the space, along with the sweet smell of hay and the warm scent of horses. "Morning," Jacob said without looking up from his work. "Grab that bucket by the door and follow me. Time to learn how to keep cattle alive in Montana." The next hour passed in a blur of new sights, sounds, and smells. Jacob showed her how to check the cattle for signs of sickness, how to make sure they had enough water, and how to spot trouble before it became dangerous. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who had done this work for years, but his voice was patient as he explained each task. "Cattle are simple creatures," he said as they walked among the herd. "Give them food, water, and shelter, and they'll take care of themselves most of the time. But you have to watch for the signs when something's wrong." He pointed to a young bull standing apart from the others. "See how he's not eating with the rest? That could mean he's sick or hurt or just being bullied by the bigger animals. Part of ranch work is being a detective, figuring out what the animals are trying to tell you." Iris found herself fascinated by the way Jacob read the cattle like they were books. He could tell which ones were healthy, which ones were pregnant, and which ones might cause trouble just by watching how they moved and acted. It was like he spoke a language she had never heard before. "How did you learn all this?" she asked as they repaired a section of fence that had been damaged by a falling tree. Jacob handed her a hammer and showed her how to drive nails into the wooden posts. "My father was a rancher back in Texas. Started learning when I was younger than you. Catherine and I came north because we wanted our own place, somewhere we could build something together." There was that sadness in his voice again when he mentioned his wife, but also something else: pride in what they had accomplished. Iris could see it in the way he looked at the ranch, like every fence post and every building held memories of working side by side with someone he loved. The work was harder than anything Iris had ever done. By noon, her arms ached from hammering fence posts, Her back hurt from bending over to check cattle, and her hands were covered with scratches from handling barbed wire. But something strange was happening. She felt good. Not just tired, but satisfied in a way she had never experienced before. "You're a natural at this," Jacob said as they stopped for lunch under the shade of a big cottonwood tree. "Most people take weeks to learn how to move around cattle without spooking them. You figured it out in one morning." Iris felt a warm glow spread through her chest at his words. Nobody had ever told her she was natural at anything before. In all her previous jobs, she had been constantly criticized, constantly told she was doing things wrong. But Jacob's praise felt real and earned. After lunch, he showed her how to work with the horses. The ranch had 6 horses, 4 for riding and working cattle, and 2 big draft horses for pulling heavy loads. Each animal had its own personality, Jacob explained, and the key to working with them was earning their trust. "This here's Belle," he said, leading Iris to a beautiful chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead. "She's got spirit, but she's fair. Treat her with respect, and she'll do anything you ask. Try to force her, and she'll make your life miserable." As if to prove his point, Belle turned her head to look at Iris with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to be judging her character. Iris had always been a little afraid of horses. They were so big and powerful, but something about Belle's calm presence made her feel braver. "Can I touch her?" Iris asked. "Slow and easy," Jacob said. "Let her smell your hand first, then pet her neck. Horses read people just like we read them. She'll know if you're nervous or angry or kind." Iris reached out carefully, letting Belle sniff her fingers before gently stroking the mare's neck. The horse's coat was soft and warm, and Belle made a quiet sound that Jacob said meant she approved. "She likes you," Jacob observed with what might have been surprise. Belle's usually pretty picky about who she trusts. As the day wore on, Iris found herself falling into the rhythm of ranch life. There was always something that needed doing: animals to feed, fences to check, equipment to repair. But unlike her previous jobs, where she had felt like she was just getting in the way, here she felt useful, important even. When evening came, Jacob invited her to eat supper with him in the main house. The kitchen was warm and comfortable, with a big wood stove and shelves lined with dishes and cooking pots. The table was set for 2, and Jacob had prepared a simple meal of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans from the garden. Catherine always said that good food shared with good company was one of life's greatest pleasures, Jacob said as they sat down to eat. "Seems wrong to eat alone every night when there's someone else on the ranch." As they ate, Jacob told her more about the ranch and what would be expected of her. The work would change with the seasons. Cattle needed different care in winter than in summer, and there were times when they would work from dawn to dusk and other times when the pace was more relaxed. "The hardest part isn't the physical work," Jacob said. "It's learning to think ahead, to plan for problems before they happen. A good rancher is always watching the weather, watching the animals, watching for signs of trouble." Iris listened carefully, storing away every piece of information like treasures in a chest. For the first time in her life, someone was teaching her skills that could make her truly valuable, not just as a servant but as a partner in important work. As they finished eating, Jacob leaned back in his chair and studied her face. "You did good work today," he said. "Better than I expected for someone who's never been on a ranch before. You've got good instincts and you're not afraid of hard work. Those are the 2 most important things in this business." Iris felt that warm glow in her chest again, but this time it was mixed with something else: determination. She wanted to prove that Jacob's faith in her wasn't misplaced. She wanted to become the kind of person who deserved the chance he had given her. "Thank you for teaching me," she said. "I know I have a lot to learn, but I promise I'll work hard." Jacob nodded, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw a real smile cross his face. "I believe you will," he said, "and I think Catherine would have liked you. She always said the best people were the ones who had to fight for everything they got." 3 months had passed since Iris arrived at the ranch, and winter had settled over the valley like a thick white blanket. The work had grown harder as the weather turned cold, but Iris had grown stronger too. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now tough and sure. Her arms could lift heavy buckets of feed without shaking, and she could read the sky for signs of coming storms almost as well as Jacob. But on this particular morning, as she walked into town beside Jacob's wagon, Iris felt the familiar knot of nervousness in her stomach. Copper Creek looked the same as always. The same dusty streets, the same wooden buildings, the same people who had whispered about her for 16 years. Only now she was different. She carried herself taller, spoke with more confidence, and wore clothes that fit properly instead of hand-me-downs that were too big or too small. "Stay close," Jacob murmured as they approached Murphy's general store. "We'll get what we need and head back home." But Iris could already see the group of women gathered near the store's entrance, their heads bent together in the familiar pose of people sharing gossip. Mrs. Henderson stood in the center of the group like a queen holding court, her sharp eyes missing nothing as she watched Jacob and Iris approach. "Well, well," Mrs. Henderson said loud enough for half the town to hear. "Look what the wind blew in." The mysterious ranch girl and her employer. The way she said the word employer made it sound dirty, like something shameful. Iris felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept walking with her head held high. She had learned many things in her months at the ranch, and one of them was that showing fear only made bullies stronger. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Jacob said politely, tipping his hat. "Ladies." The women nodded back, but their eyes were cold and judgmental. Iris could feel them watching her every move, looking for something to criticize or whisper about later. She had hoped that proving herself at the ranch might change how the town saw her, but it seemed that some opinions were carved in stone. Inside the store, Mr. Murphy greeted them warmly. He had always been kinder than most of the townspeople, and he seemed genuinely pleased to see them. "Jacob, Iris, good to see you both. How are things out at the ranch?" "Can't complain," Jacob replied, pulling out his list of supplies. "Cattle are healthy, and we're ready for whatever winter throws at us." As they gathered their supplies, Iris could hear the women outside continuing their conversation in voices just loud enough to be heard through the windows. "It's not natural, if you ask me," one woman said. "A young girl living alone with a man like that. No proper supervision, no chaperone. What would his poor Catherine think?" "Mark my words," Mrs. Henderson added. "No good will come of this arrangement. That girl has always been trouble, and now she's corrupting a decent man's reputation." Iris's hands clenched into fists as she listened to them tear apart the best thing that had ever happened to her. These women didn't know anything about her life at the ranch, about the respect Jacob showed her or the pride she took in her work. They saw only what they wanted to see: scandal and shame where none existed. "They don't know what they're talking about," Mr. Murphy said quietly, apparently overhearing the same conversation. "Anyone with eyes can see that you've bloomed since you went to work for Jacob. You look healthier, happier, more confident. That's what honest work and respect can do for a person." His words were kind, but they couldn't completely erase the sting of the gossip outside. As they loaded their supplies into the wagon, Iris found herself looking around the town with new eyes. She had always known that Copper Creek was small and narrow-minded, but now she understood just how trapped she would have been if she had stayed here. On the ranch, she was valued for her skills and her contribution to the work. Here, she would always be the foundling, the girl with no family and no prospects, no matter what she accomplished or how hard she worked. "Don't let them get to you," Jacob said as they drove out of town. "Small minds always find something to gossip about. What matters is what we know to be true." But Iris could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the reins a little too tightly. The gossip was affecting him too, and that made her angry in a way that insults directed at her alone never could. Jacob was a good man who had done nothing wrong except show kindness to someone who needed it. He didn't deserve to have his reputation questioned because of her. As they drove through the valley toward home, Iris made a decision that both scared and strengthened her. She wouldn't let the town's narrow thinking drive her away from the first place she had ever truly belonged. But she also wouldn't let their gossip hurt Jacob any more than it already had. That evening, as they sat by the fire in the main house going over the ranch's account books, Iris brought up what had happened in town. I heard what they were saying, she said, not looking up from the numbers she was copying into the ledger. About us, about the ranch, about it not being proper. Jacob set down his pen and looked at her seriously. And what do you think about what they're saying? Iris considered the question carefully. 3 months ago, she would have been devastated by the town's disapproval, ready to run away rather than face their judgment. But now, sitting in the warm kitchen of a home where she felt valued and respected, their opinions seemed less important. I think they don't understand what we've built here, she said finally. They see something wrong because they can't imagine a man and woman working together as equals without there being something shameful about it. Jacob nodded slowly. Catherine used to say that people fear what they don't understand. We're living differently than they think we should, so they assume we must be doing something wrong. Are we? Iris asked. Living wrong, I mean? Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was firm and sure. No, we're living honestly, working hard, and treating each other with respect. If that's wrong, then I don't want to be right. As the fire burned lower and the evening grew quiet around them, Iris felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, but resolve. She had found her place in the world, and she wouldn't let anyone take it away from her. Not the gossips in town, not the people who thought they knew better than she did what her life should look like. For the first time, she was part of something bigger than herself, something worth fighting for. And if that meant facing down the disapproval of a town that had never wanted her anyway, then that's what she would do. The mountains stood silent and strong outside the windows, and Iris drew strength from their permanence. Like them, she would endure whatever storms came her way. She had finally found her home, and she wasn't giving it up without a fight. The blizzard struck like an angry beast in the middle of February night, shaking Iris awake with winds that howled louder than wolves. Snow hammered against her cabin windows so hard she thought the glass might break, and the whole building trembled under the storm's fury. She pulled on her heaviest coat and boots, knowing without being told that this was the kind of weather that could kill cattle in a matter of hours. Through the swirling white darkness, she could barely make out a lantern moving near the barn. Jacob was already out there, fighting to save their animals. The wind nearly knocked her down as she stumbled through knee-deep snow toward the light. Ice crystals stung her face like tiny needles, and the cold was so fierce it made her lungs burn with every breath. But she pushed forward because this was what partners did. They faced danger together. The north fence is down, Jacob shouted over the screaming wind when she reached him. Half the herd scattered toward the canyon. If we don't find them before morning, they'll freeze to death. Iris felt her stomach drop. The canyon was 3 miles away, full of ravines and hidden drops that would be impossible to see in this storm. Cattle that wandered in there during a blizzard rarely came out alive. I'll take Belle and check the east pasture, she called back, already moving toward the horses. You take Thunder and head north. No! Jacob grabbed her arm, his eyes wild with worry. It's too dangerous. Stay here and keep the fires going in the barn. But Iris pulled free, her jaw set with determination. Those cattle will die if we don't find them. I know this land as well as you do now, and Belle knows it even better. We're wasting time arguing. For a moment, Jacob stared at her through the swirling snow, and she could see him realizing that she was no longer the frightened girl who had come to his ranch. She was a full partner now, someone who understood that sometimes you had to risk everything to save what mattered most. Stay together, he said finally. If you get lost, follow Belle's instincts. Horses can find their way home even when people can't. The next 4 hours were the longest of Iris's life. She and Belle fought their way through the storm, following the faint tracks of scattered cattle that the wind kept trying to erase. The cold was so intense that her fingers went numb even inside thick gloves, and ice formed on Belle's mane and her own eyebrows. They found the first group of cattle huddled against a fallen log, their backs covered with snow and their breath coming out in great white clouds. Iris used her voice and Belle's steady presence to gather them into a tight group, then began the slow process of driving them back toward the ranch. But it was the second group that nearly broke her heart. She found them at the edge of the canyon, 20 head of cattle standing confused and frightened as the storm tried to push them over the rim. One wrong step in this weather, and they would fall to their deaths on the rocks below. Belle seemed to understand the danger without being told. The mare moved carefully along the canyon's edge, positioning herself between the cattle and the drop while Iris called out in the firm but gentle voice Jacob had taught her to use with frightened animals. "Easy, girls," she called through the wind. "Time to go home. Follow Belle. She knows the way." It took an hour to move the cattle away from the canyon and start them toward safety. By then, Iris couldn't feel her feet inside her boots, and her face was so cold she could barely speak. But she kept going, because giving up meant death for the animals she had worked so hard to protect. When she finally drove the last of the cattle into the sheltered pasture near the ranch, she found Jacob waiting for her with a look of relief and pride that warmed her more than any fire could have. "Thought I might have lost you both," he said, helping her down from Belle's back. "How many did you find?" "All of them," Iris said through chattering teeth. "Belle did most of the work. I just followed her lead." As they settled the exhausted animals in the barn and made sure they had food and water, Jacob kept looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You saved them," he said quietly. "If you hadn't gone out there, we would have lost half the herd." Iris felt a glow of pride that had nothing to do with warmth and everything to do with knowing she had proven herself when it mattered most. "We saved them," she corrected. "Partners, remember?" That night, as they sat by the fire in the main house drinking hot coffee and letting the feeling come back to their frozen hands and feet, Jacob said something that changed everything between them. "I was wrong about you when you first came here," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "I thought I was giving you a chance to prove yourself, but you weren't the one who needed proving." "I was." Iris looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Jacob set down his cup and looked directly at her. "After Catherine died, I thought I was done. Done with caring about anything. Done with building something that mattered. Done with letting anyone close enough to hurt me again. I was just going through the motions of living." He paused, his voice growing softer. "But working beside you these past months, watching you grow stronger and more confident, seeing how you care about this place and these animals, you reminded me what it feels like to be alive again." Something shifted in the air between them. Something warm and precious and a little scary. Iris felt her heart start beating faster, not from cold or fear this time, but from something entirely different. "Jacob," she whispered. Not sure what she wanted to say, but knowing that something important was happening, he stood up slowly and crossed to where she sat on the couch. Without saying a word, he reached out and gently pulled her to her feet. Then, for the first time in her life, someone wrapped their arms around Iris in an embrace that asked for nothing except her presence. She had never known what a real hug felt like before this moment. She had received brief, duty-bound touches from the people who had grudgingly cared for her over the years, but never this, the simple gift of human warmth offered without conditions or expectations. In Jacob's arms, Iris felt something she had never experienced: complete safety. Not just physical safety, but the deep, soul-level security of being totally accepted exactly as she was. His embrace didn't ask her to be smaller or quieter or more grateful. It simply welcomed her as an equal, as a partner, as someone worthy of love. When they finally separated, both of them understood that their relationship had crossed into new territory. What had started as a business arrangement and grown into partnership had now become something deeper, a connection that went beyond work or convenience to touch the very heart of who they were. "Thank you," Iris whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was thanking him for. For the job, for the respect, for showing her what she was capable of, or for this moment that made her feel like she truly belonged somewhere. "Thank you," Jacob replied, and she could hear in his voice that he meant something just as deep and important. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the warm house, two people who had found each other in the midst of their separate loneliness sat quietly by the fire, understanding that their lives had just changed in a way that could never be undone. Spring arrived in the valley like a miracle, melting away the last of winter's harshness and painting the world in shades of green that seemed impossible after months of white and gray. Iris stood in the garden behind the main house, planting vegetables that would feed them through the coming year, when she heard the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders crested the hill that led down to the ranch, and even from a distance, Iris could tell they weren't local. Their clothes were too fine, their horses too well-groomed, and their posture too stiff for people who belonged in Montana territory. Jacob emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as he watched the strangers approach. His face had taken on the careful, guarded expression he wore when he sensed trouble coming. The man who dismounted first was tall and thin, with graying hair and cold eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the ranch with calculating precision. Behind him came a woman in an expensive black dress and a younger man carrying a leather satchel that marked him as some kind of professional. "Jacob Whitmore?" the first man said, his voice carrying the clipped accent of someone from back east. "That's right," Jacob replied, his tone neutral but wary. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Martin Fitzgerald. Catherine was my sister." The man's words hit like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of tension that spread across the yard. "This is my wife, Eleanor, and our lawyer, Mr. Pemberton." Iris felt her stomach clench with sudden fear. She had heard Jacob speak of Catherine's family with something less than fondness, describing them as people who had disapproved of his wife's decision to marry a simple rancher and move to the frontier. "Martin," Jacob said, his voice carefully controlled. "It's been a long time. What brings you to Montana?" Martin's eyes swept over the ranch, taking in the well-maintained buildings, the healthy cattle, and finally settling on Iris with obvious disapproval. "We've heard disturbing reports about your living arrangements since Catherine's death. Reports that concern us greatly." The lawyer stepped forward, his thin face pinched with disapproval. "Mr. Whitmore, we understand you've taken in a young woman of questionable background and are living with her without benefit of marriage or proper supervision. Such an arrangement reflects poorly on Catherine's memory and raises serious questions about your fitness to manage her inheritance." Iris felt the ground seem to shift beneath her feet. Catherine's inheritance? She had never thought about Jacob's wife having family back east, or about those family members having any claim on the ranch she had come to think of as home. "Iris is my business partner," Jacob said firmly. "She works this ranch alongside me and has earned every bit of respect I show her. Whatever gossip you've heard has been twisted by small minds that can't imagine an honest working relationship between a man and woman." Eleanor Fitzgerald spoke for the first time, her voice dripping with false concern. "Oh, my dear Jacob, surely you can see how inappropriate this all appears. A young woman living alone with you, no chaperone, no proper family connections. What would Catherine think?" The mention of his dead wife's name made Jacob's jaw tighten with anger. "Catherine would think that I'm living according to the values she and I shared, treating people with respect regardless of their background, and judging them by their actions rather than their circumstances." Mr. Pemberton opened his leather satchel and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Catherine Whitmore left a considerable inheritance, including her half-ownership of this ranch. As her closest blood relatives, the Fitzgeralds have certain rights regarding how that inheritance is managed." He spread the papers on a wooden crate that sat near the porch steps, his finger pointing to various legal phrases that meant nothing to Iris but everything to the future of her life here. "The inheritance stipulates that the property should be managed in a manner that would honor Catherine's memory and values. The current arrangement clearly falls short of that standard." Martin stepped closer to Jacob, his voice taking on a threatening tone. "We're prepared to challenge your right to Catherine's portion of this ranch unless you make immediate changes to your living situation. Send the girl away, Jacob. Find yourself a proper housekeeper, someone older and more suitable. Do this and we'll leave you in peace." Iris felt like she was drowning in cold water. Everything she had built here, everything she had become, was being threatened by people who had never even met her. They were judging her based on gossip and assumptions, ready to destroy her life to protect their idea of what was proper. "And if I refuse?" Jacob asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The lawyer smiled coldly. "Then we'll see you in court. We have witnesses prepared to testify about the improper nature of your relationship with this girl. We have evidence of the scandal you've created in the local community. A judge will have no choice but to award Catherine's portion of the ranch to her family, where it will be properly managed. For a long moment, silence stretched across the yard like a rope about to snap. Iris could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the weight of her entire future balanced on the edge of whatever Jacob said next. Finally, Jacob straightened to his full height and looked Martin directly in the eye. "I need time to consider your offer." 48 hours, Martin said curtly. "That should be more than enough time to make the right decision. We'll be staying at the hotel in town, waiting for your answer." As the three visitors mounted their horses and rode away, Iris felt like the solid ground of her new life was crumbling beneath her feet. Everything she had worked for, everything she had become, was being threatened by people who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to their plans. Jacob stood watching until the riders disappeared over the hill, then turned to look at her with eyes full of pain and determination. "They can't take this away from us," he said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty that scared her more than any threat. "Can't they?" Iris asked, voicing the fear that was growing in her chest like a cold stone. "They have lawyers and money and family connections. What do we have?" Jacob walked over to where she stood frozen in the garden, dirt still clinging to her hands from the vegetables she had been planting for their future. He took those dirty hands in his own clean ones and held them gently. "We have something they don't understand," he said. "We have a partnership built on respect and trust and shared dreams. We have love, Iris. Real love. Not the kind that tries to control or diminish, but the kind that helps each other grow stronger." As he spoke, Iris realized that somewhere in the months of working side by side, of facing storms together, of learning to depend on each other, she had fallen in love with this quiet, strong man who had given her the chance to discover who she really was. And now, just when she was finally brave enough to admit that love to herself, it was all being threatened by people who would never understand what they had built together. The courthouse in Copper Creek had never seen such a crowd, with people packed into every seat and more standing along the walls like they were watching the most exciting show that had ever come to their small town. Iris walked down the center aisle beside Jacob, her chin held high despite the whispers that followed her like buzzing flies. She wore the blue dress she had sewn herself from fabric bought with money she had earned through honest work, and her hair was pinned back in a simple style that made her look older than her 17 years. Most importantly, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her own worth, even if others couldn't see it. Martin Fitzgerald sat at the front table with his lawyer, both men looking smug and certain of victory. They had spent the morning painting a picture of scandal and impropriety, suggesting that Iris had somehow tricked a grieving widower into an inappropriate relationship for her own gain. "Your Honor," Mr. Pemberton said in his smooth lawyer voice, "the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Whitmore's judgment has been clouded by his association with this young woman. The deceased Mrs. Catherine Whitmore was a woman of impeccable moral standards who would never have approved of such an arrangement." Iris felt each word like a slap, but she kept her face calm and steady. She had learned many things in her months at the ranch, and one of them was that showing fear only made bullies stronger. When it was Jacob's turn to speak, he stood with the quiet dignity that had first caught her attention in Murphy's store so many months ago. His voice was clear and strong as it carried to every corner of the packed courtroom. "Your Honor, I want to tell you about partnership," he began, his eyes finding Iris's face in the crowd. "Catherine and I built our ranch together, working side by side through good times and bad. When she died, I thought that kind of partnership was gone from my life forever." He paused, and Iris could see the emotion he was trying to control. "But Iris taught me that love doesn't get smaller when you share it with someone new. It grows bigger. She didn't replace Catherine in my heart. She helped me remember what Catherine and I believed in. Hard work, fair treatment, and judging people by their character instead of their circumstances." Jacob turned to look directly at Martin and his lawyer. "You talk about Catherine's memory like you knew her, but you didn't approve when she chose to marry me and come west. You thought she was throwing her life away on a simple rancher. Well, she proved you wrong then, and Iris is proving you wrong now." A murmur went through the courtroom, and Iris saw several people nodding in agreement. Dr. Morrison, who had always been kind to her, stood up from his seat in the middle of the crowd. "Your Honor, if I may," the doctor said, his voice carrying the authority of someone the whole town respected. "I've watched Jacob Whitmore and Iris Hartwell work together for over a year now. What they have isn't scandal, it's the kind of partnership that built this territory." One by one, other people began to stand. Mrs. Murphy from the general store admitted that she had been wrong to judge Iris so harshly. The blacksmith testified that he had seen them working together through harsh weather, proving their dedication to each other and their shared goals. Even some of the ranchers from neighboring spreads spoke up about Iris's skill with horses and her reputation for honest dealing. But it was the final witness who surprised everyone in the courtroom, including Iris herself. A young woman in traveling clothes stood at the back of the room, her voice clear and determined as she spoke. "Your Honor, my name is Beth Morrison, and I've just arrived from Denver. I'm here because I've been looking for my sister for 16 years. The courtroom fell completely silent as Beth walked forward, her eyes fixed on Iris with an expression of wonder and love. "You were left at the church in Copper Creek as a baby with a note that said your name was Iris. What the note didn't say was that you had family who never stopped looking for you." Iris felt the world tilt and spin around her as Beth reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a small wooden horse, carved with careful detail and worn smooth by many years of handling. "You used to sleep with this every night when we were little," Beth said, her voice growing thick with emotion. "Our parents died in a fever outbreak when you were barely walking. I was sent to relatives in Colorado and you disappeared. But I never gave up hope of finding you." Iris took the little horse with hands that shook like leaves in a strong wind. The moment her fingers touched the familiar wood, memories came flooding back like water through a broken dam. She remembered the horse, remembered a girl who used to sing to her, remembered feeling loved and safe before the world taught her that she was unwanted. "I remember," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I remember you singing to me." Beth stepped forward and took her sister's hands. "I have a house in Denver, a good life, money saved from years of working. But more than that, I have stories about our parents, about the family that loved you before you were lost. I can tell you where you came from, who you really are." The judge looked back and forth between the legal papers on his desk and the two sisters standing before him. The inheritance dispute suddenly seemed much less important than this moment of family reunion. "Miss Hartwell," he said gently, "it appears you have some important decisions to make." Iris looked at Beth, seeing in her face the family she had always dreamed of having. Then she looked at Jacob, seeing in his eyes the life they had built together and the future they had planned. Finally, she looked around the courtroom at the people who had judged her, accepted her, and were now watching to see what she would choose. "I do have decisions to make," she said, her voice steady and clear despite the tears on her cheeks. "And I choose everything." She turned to Beth, squeezing her sister's hands tightly. "I want to know about our family, about our parents, about where I came from. I've been lost for so long, and finding you feels like finding a piece of my soul I didn't know was missing." Then she turned to Jacob, her heart full of love and determination. "But I also know where I belong. This ranch, this valley, this life we've built together. This is my home. You are my home. And I'm not giving up the future we've planned just because some people think it doesn't look proper." Jacob stepped forward, and as his arms came around her, Iris felt that same sense of complete acceptance she had discovered that night by the fire. But now it was deeper, richer, strengthened by the knowledge that she was choosing this love not from desperation or gratitude, but from her own strength and certainty. "The court finds no grounds for challenging Mr. Whitmore's ownership of his property," the judge declared, his voice cutting through the emotional tension in the room. "Furthermore, the relationship between Mr. Whitmore and Miss Hartwell appears to be based on mutual respect and genuine affection, which this court sees no reason to condemn." As they walked out of the courthouse into the bright spring sunshine, Iris felt like she was stepping into an entirely new life. She had her sister back, her past restored, and her future secured. But most importantly, she had learned that her worth wasn't something that could be given or taken away by others. It was something that lived inside her, as permanent and unshakable as the mountains that surrounded their valley. 6 months later, the wedding took place in the valley where Iris had learned to be strong, with the autumn mountains standing like silent witnesses and the endless Montana sky serving as their cathedral. It was a simple ceremony, but it carried the weight of two hearts that had found their way to each other through storms both literal and figurative. Iris wore a dress that told the story of her journey, white cotton fabric that Beth had brought from Denver, sewn in a style that honored their mother's memory, but fitted to Iris's own strong frame that had been shaped by months of ranch work. The dress was beautiful, but more importantly, it was hers in a way that nothing had ever been hers before. Jacob stood waiting for her at the front of the small gathering, wearing his best suit and a smile that transformed his weathered face. Beside him stood Dr. Morrison, who had agreed to perform the ceremony, and beside Iris walked Beth, whose presence made this day feel complete in ways Iris was still discovering. The guests were few but meaningful. The townspeople who had come to understand that love takes many forms, the neighboring ranchers who respected the partnership Jacob and Iris had built, and Beth, whose stories had helped Iris understand where she came from even as she chose where she was going. "Do you, Jacob, take this woman to be your wife?" Dr. Morrison asked, his voice carrying clearly across the valley. "Do you promise to honor her as your equal partner in all things, to support her dreams as she supports yours, and to love her not for who you think she should be, but for who she truly is?" "I do," Jacob said, his voice strong with conviction. "I take her as she is, strong, capable, and deserving of every good thing life can offer. I promise to be her partner, not her savior, because she never needed saving. She just needed someone to see what was already there." When it was Iris's turn, she felt the words rise from the deepest part of her heart, carrying all the truth she had learned about herself in the months since she had first accepted Jacob's offer of work. "I take you, Jacob, not because I need someone to complete me, but because I choose to share my completeness with you. You didn't rescue me from my old life. You gave me the space and respect I needed to rescue myself. I promise to be your partner in all things, your equal in this life we're building together." As they kissed to seal their promises, Iris felt the last pieces of her old fears dissolve like snow in spring sunshine. She was no longer the unwanted foundling or the girl who couldn't find her place. She was Jacob's wife, Beth's sister, and most importantly, her own person, strong enough to stand alone but choosing to walk through life beside someone who valued that strength. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful, filled with music and laughter that echoed off the mountains. Beth played the piano she had brought from Denver, filling the evening air with melodies that spoke of home and belonging. Dr. Morrison told stories that had everyone laughing until their sides hurt, and even Mrs. Henderson, who had come despite her earlier disapproval, admitted that she had been wrong about the match. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed created just for this moment, Jacob and Iris stood together on the porch of their home, watching their guests dance in the yard below. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't offered you that job?" Jacob asked, his arm around her waist as they looked out over the valley that had become their shared kingdom. Iris considered the question, thinking of all the different paths her life might have taken. "I think I would have found my way to strength eventually," she said thoughtfully, "but I'm grateful it was with you. In this place, surrounded by these mountains that taught me how to be unshakable." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had shown her that love wasn't about being saved or being small enough to fit someone else's expectations. "You taught me that my worth wasn't something I had to earn or prove to anyone. It was something I already carried inside me, just waiting for the right moment to shine." Jacob smiled, the expression lighting up his entire face. "And you taught me that healing doesn't mean going back to who you were before the hurt happened. Sometimes it means becoming someone entirely new, someone stronger and more complete than you ever imagined possible." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Beth joined them on the porch, her face glowing with happiness for her sister's joy. "I've been thinking," Beth said, settling into one of the wooden chairs Jacob had made, "about staying here permanently. Denver is nice, but this valley, there's something magical about it. Something that heals old hurts and helps people become who they're meant to be." Iris felt her heart expand with even more joy. Having her sister close would mean having both her past and her future woven together in the place that had taught her to be brave. "There's always room for family here," Jacob said warmly. "This ranch was built by people who believed in second chances and new beginnings. You'd be welcome for as long as you want to stay." As they sat together under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by the land they had worked with their own hands and the love they had chosen to build together, Iris finally understood what she had been searching for during all those years of feeling lost and unwanted. It wasn't the approval of others or the security of fitting into someone else's idea of what her life should look like. It was the courage to define her own worth, to choose her own path, and to love and be loved without conditions or compromises. The mountains stood eternal around them, and the valley held their story like a promise, that even the most lost among us can find our place in the world, not by becoming smaller or more acceptable, but by growing into the fullness of who we were always meant to be. In Jacob's arms, with Beth's laughter filling the air and their chosen family celebrating around them, Iris had finally found what every human heart searches for. A place where she was valued not for what she could provide or how well she could fit in, but simply for being exactly who she was. The girl who had once pressed herself against store walls, trying to disappear from the world's judgment, had become a woman who stood tall in her own valley, surrounded by love that asked nothing of her except that she continue being her strong, authentic self. And in that transformation, she had discovered the most important truth of all, that home isn't a place you find, but a feeling you create when you finally have the courage to be completely, unapologetically yourself. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in early spring, carried by a rider whose horse was lathered with sweat from hard travel. Iris was breaking in a young stallion when she saw the man approaching, and something about his urgent pace made her heart skip with worry. "Mrs. Whitmore," the rider called out, waving the yellow paper above his head. "Important message from back east." Iris dismounted quickly, her hands steady despite the sudden nervousness in her chest. In the 2 years since her marriage to Jacob, telegrams had meant either good news about cattle prices or bad news about someone's health. This one felt different somehow, more urgent and mysterious. Jacob emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as he walked over to join them. "What's the message, Tom?" he asked the telegraph operator. Tom handed over the telegram with a serious expression. "Came through this morning from Denver. The lady who sent it said it was urgent and to spare no expense getting it to you quickly." Iris unfolded the paper with fingers that trembled slightly. The message was short but shocking. "Iris, stop, found information about your parents, stop, they owned land, stop, valuable land, stop, coming to Montana, immediately stop, important legal matters, stop, Beth." Jacob read the telegram over her shoulder, his eyebrows rising with surprise. "Your parents owned land? Beth never mentioned that when she found you." "She might not have known," Iris said, her mind racing with possibilities. "She was just a child when our parents died. Maybe she's learned something new." The next week passed slowly as they waited for Beth's arrival. Iris found herself distracted during her daily work, wondering what kind of land her parents might have owned and why it would matter after all these years. She had made peace with not knowing much about her past, but now that peace felt fragile and uncertain. Beth arrived on the morning stage, carrying a leather satchel stuffed with papers, and wearing an expression that mixed excitement with worry. She hugged Iris tightly, then pulled back to look at her with eyes that sparkled with news. "You're not going to believe what I discovered," Beth said, practically bouncing with energy. "I was going through some old papers in Denver, documents that belonged to the family who took me in after our parents died. Hidden at the bottom of an old trunk, I found these." She opened her satchel and pulled out several yellow documents, spreading them carefully on the kitchen table. The papers were old and fragile, covered with official-looking stamps and signatures. "These are land grants," Beth explained, pointing to the largest document. "Our father, Thomas Hartwell, owned 2,000 acres of prime land in Colorado Territory. Mountain land with water rights, timber rights, and—" She paused dramatically. "Mineral rights." Jacob let out a low whistle. "Mineral rights in Colorado? With all the gold and silver mining going on there, that could be worth a fortune." Beth nodded eagerly. That's exactly what I thought. I took these papers to a lawyer in Denver and he confirmed it. The land is still legally ours, yours, Iris. As the surviving heir, you own everything our father left behind. Iris stared at the documents, trying to process what this meant. All her life, she had been the girl with nothing, no family, no money, no prospects. Now, suddenly, she might be wealthy beyond anything she had ever imagined. But why didn't anyone know about this before? She asked. Why didn't the people who took care of me after our parents died ever mention it? Beth's expression darkened. That's where the story gets complicated. The family who took me in, the Morrisons, they knew about the land. They were supposed to be holding it in trust for both of us until we came of age. But they told everyone the land was worthless, just Rocky Mountain ground that nobody wanted. She pulled out another document, this one more recent. I did some investigating in Denver. The Morrisons have been quietly leasing mining rights on our father's land for 15 years, collecting money that should have been ours. They've made thousands of dollars while letting everyone believe we were orphans with nothing. Jacob's jaw tightened with anger. They stole from you. Both of you. Worse than that, Beth said. They let Iris grow up thinking she was worthless, unwanted, a burden on everyone who helped her, all while they were getting rich off her inheritance. Iris felt a strange mix of emotions washing over her, anger at the injustice, excitement about the possibilities, but also confusion about what this meant for her life now. She had built her identity around being someone who had to earn her place in the world through hard work and determination. What did it mean to discover that she had actually been wealthy all along? What do we do now? She asked. Beth smiled, but there was steel in her expression. We fight. I've already hired a lawyer in Denver, and he says we have an excellent case. The Morrisons thought they were safe because we were just children when they started their scheme, but the law is on our side. Over the next several days, as Beth explained the legal process and the evidence she had gathered, Iris found herself struggling with feelings she didn't know how to handle. Part of her was thrilled at the thought of finally getting justice for the wrongs that had been done to her. But another part of her was afraid that this new wealth might change who she was or how people saw her. I've been poor my whole life, she confided to Jacob one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. I know how to be poor. I know how to work hard and earn what I have. But being rich, I don't know how to do that. Jacob took her hand in his touch steady and reassuring. Money doesn't change who you are inside, he said. You'll still be the same strong, capable woman who tamed wild horses and saved cattle in blizzards. The only difference is that now you'll have more choices about how to use those abilities. But what if people start treating me differently? Iris asked. What if they think I'm putting on airs or forgetting where I came from? Jacob was quiet for a moment, considering her question seriously. Some people might think that, he said finally. But the people who really matter, the ones who love you for who you are, they'll be happy that you're finally getting what was always rightfully yours. As Beth prepared to return to Denver to handle the legal proceedings, she made an offer that surprised both Iris and Jacob. Come with me, she said. Both of you. Help me fight this case, and when we win, we can decide together how to manage the land. Maybe develop it ourselves, maybe sell it and use the money for something else. But whatever we do, we should do it as a family. Iris looked around the valley that had become her home, at the ranch where she had learned who she really was, at the mountains that had taught her to be strong. The thought of leaving, even temporarily, felt like tearing away a part of herself. But she also thought about all the other girls like her, orphans and foundlings who were growing up believing they were worthless because people with power and money had told them so. Maybe having wealth of her own would give her the ability to help them in ways she never could before. We'll go, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. But only for as long as it takes to get justice. This valley is our home, and we'll be coming back. 5 years had passed since the legal battle in Denver, and the Whitmore Ranch had grown into something that surpassed even Iris's wildest dreams. The money from her father's land had allowed them to expand their operation, but more importantly, it had given them the resources to create something truly special, a place where second chances flourished like wildflowers after rain. On this particular morning, Iris stood in the main corral working with a spirited mare that had been deemed impossible to train by her previous owner. The horse was beautiful and intelligent, but wary of human touch in a way that reminded Iris powerfully of herself in those early days. "Easy, girl," Iris murmured, her voice calm and patient. "Nobody's going to hurt you here. You just need time to learn that not all people are the same." Jacob watched from the fence, his face showing the same quiet pride he'd worn for years as he observed his wife's gift with difficult animals. In the 5 years since their return from Denver, Iris had become known throughout the territory as someone who could gentle the most stubborn horses, and ranchers traveled hundreds of miles to bring their problem animals to her. "Another letter came this morning," Jacob called, holding up an envelope. "Looks like someone from as far away as Texas wants to buy one of your horses." Iris smiled but kept her attention focused on the mare. The horse had taken a tentative step forward, drawn by the quiet confidence in Iris's voice and the patience that seemed to flow from her like warmth from a fire. "She's almost ready," Iris said. "Give her another week of gentle work, and she'll be the finest riding horse in 3 territories." Beth emerged from the main house, her arms full of linens to hang on the line. She had decided to stay permanently after the legal victory, finding that the valley's healing powers worked on her just as they had on her sister. Over the years, she had become the ranch's unofficial manager, handling the business side of their growing operation while Iris focused on the horses and Jacob managed the cattle. "Dr. Morrison's coming up the road," Beth called out. "And he's got someone with him. Looks like another young woman who needs a fresh start." The someone turned out to be a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, travel-worn and carrying a small bundle that probably contained everything she owned in the world. Her clothes were patched but clean, and her eyes held the same mixture of hope and fear that Iris remembered wearing like a constant companion in her younger days. "This is Mary," Dr. Morrison said as they approached the corral. "She's been working for a family in town, but—" He paused, his meaning clear without needing to spell out the details. "I can work hard," Mary said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying a determination that impressed Iris. "I'm good with animals, and I learn fast. I just need someone to give me a chance." Iris looked at the young woman, really looked at her, seeing past the worn clothes and nervous expression to the potential that lay beneath. She thought of the mare in the corral, of her own journey from frightened girl to confident woman, of all the second chances that had led to this moment. "What kind of work are you looking for?" Iris asked gently, remembering how important it had been for Jacob to ask her the same question with respect rather than pity. "Anything honest?" Mary replied, lifting her chin with a dignity that reminded Iris of herself. "I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'll do whatever needs doing." Jacob stepped forward, his decision already made. "We could use help with the horse training program," he said. "Iris has been so successful that we're getting more requests than we can handle. Room and board, fair wages, and no questions asked about whatever brought you here." The words were an echo of the offer he had made to Iris so many years ago, and the circular nature of the moment wasn't lost on any of them. Mary's eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't disappoint you." "You don't have to prove anything to us," Iris said, remembering how desperately she had wanted to prove her worth in those early days. "Just be yourself. That's always enough here." As they showed Mary to the small cabin that had been built for visiting workers, Iris felt the deep satisfaction of a circle completed. The frightened girl who had once accepted charity from a stranger was now in a position to offer that same gift to someone else. That evening, as their extended family, for that's what they had become, this chosen family of the heart, sat around the dinner table. Iris reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. The conversation flowed easily between Jacob's quiet observations about the cattle, Beth's updates on their business correspondence, and Mary's shy questions about ranch life. "I got a letter from the children's home in Helena today," Beth announced during dessert. "They're asking if we'd consider taking in 2 more girls who've aged out of their care. Sisters, about 14 and 16 years old." "What did you tell them?" Jacob asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Beth smiled. "I told them we'd need to build another cabin first, but that there's always room here for young people who need a chance to discover what they're capable of. After dinner, as they had every evening for the past 7 years, Iris and Jacob walked out to the porch to watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. The ritual had become sacred to them, a daily reminder of the beauty they had found in their unconventional life. "Do you ever miss it?" Jacob asked. "The simplicity of when it was just the two of us working this ranch?" Iris considered the question, thinking of all the lives they had touched and all the young people who had found healing in this valley. "I miss the quiet sometimes," she said honestly. "But I love what we've built here. We're not just raising cattle and horses anymore, we're raising hope." In the distance, they could see Mary sitting on the steps of her new cabin, her face turned toward the setting sun. The fear was still there, but it was already being tempered by something else. The beginning of belief that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could belong. "She reminds me of someone I once knew," Jacob said with gentle teasing. Iris laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like a bell. "I hope she's smarter than that girl was. I hope she realizes sooner that her worth isn't something she has to earn. It's something she already carries inside her, just waiting for the right moment to shine." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Iris felt the profound contentment of a life lived with purpose. She had learned that love wasn't about being saved or being small enough to fit into someone else's expectations. It was about being seen, valued, and chosen for exactly who you were. The unwanted foundling had become a woman of substance, a mentor to others walking the same difficult path she had once traveled. In Jacob's arms on that Montana porch, surrounded by the land they had cultivated and the family they had chosen, Iris finally understood what she had been searching for all her life. She had found home not in a place, but in the radical act of loving and being loved without conditions. And in that love, she had discovered the most important truth of all, that every person carries within them a worth that can never be diminished by circumstances or diminished by others' opinions. Sometimes it just takes the right embrace, the right moment of acceptance, to help that worth bloom into its full magnificence. The mountains stood eternal witness to their story, and the valley held their legacy like a promise, that even the most lost among us can find our place in the world, not by becoming smaller or more acceptable, but by growing into the fullness of who we were always meant to be.